Frustrating. That's how Jack Daniel's parent company is describing Canada's decision to pull Tennessee whiskey along with all U.S. liquors off of its shelves amid a growing trade war.
Canada just dropped a bombshell and it's backfiring fast. In a bold move against U.S. tariffs, provinces pulled Jack Daniel's and other American alcohols off store shelves. What was meant to send a message to Washington has turned into chaos. Empty shelves, frustrated bar owners, and consumers furious online. Meanwhile, across the border, Trump's raising a glass as if nothing happened. Today, we are breaking down how a political stunt turned into a nationwide whiskey meltdown. So stay tuned till the end to know all about it. It's hard not to feel a little disheartened as two longtime neighbors, the US and Canada, watch their economic relationship fracture. What once was smooth trade and shared markets has suddenly become tense, and everyday Canadians are feeling the ripple effects. In early 2025, in retaliation for the US imposing a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, Canadian provinces, led by the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, made a dramatic move. They pulled American-made alcohol from shelves across the country. The impact was immediate and visible. Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, and other well-known U.S. spirits disappeared almost overnight, leaving liquor stores and bars scrambling. In Ontario alone, sales of U.S. spirits plummeted by as much as 80% within weeks, while nationwide, the decline hovered around 66%. Consumers were left frustrated, and bars struggled to find adequate domestic substitutes, even as local distilleries tried to fill the void. Some provinces eventually softened the stance, but the disruption had already exposed vulnerabilities in Canada's reliance on American imports. Businesses warned of lost revenue, and households felt the pinch of what was meant to be a symbolic strike. So how have Jack Daniel's and other U.S. producers reacted to Canada's bold yet costly move? For Jack Daniel's, the sudden disappearance from Canadian shelves was more than just a market hiccup, it was a shock. The brand, produced by Brown-Forman, has long been a staple in Canadian bars and households, accounting for a steady, if modest, portion of sales. While Canada represents just about 1% of Brown-Forman's global revenue, the public attention and consumer frustration made the impact feel far larger. CEO Lawson Whiting called Canada's action worse than a tariff, explaining that it wasn't a simple tax bite. It literally removed products from the market, leaving loyal customers empty-handed. Across the country, liquor stores reported a sudden 60 to 80% drop in U.S. spirit sales, with Jack Daniel's often leading the decline. Bars scrambled to replace it with domestic alternatives or lesser-known imports, but for many patrons, nothing quite hit the spot. Social media quickly lit up with photos of empty shelves, frustrated bar owners, and memes capturing the nationwide headache. The move, meant to showcase Canada's economic strength, instead highlighted the challenges of removing a beloved foreign product. This crisis for Brown-Forman and other U.S. producers naturally set the stage for the broader economic and societal consequences, which we'll explore now. The boycott didn't just rattle Canadian shelves, it sent shockwaves through the wider economy. U.S. spirits sales nationwide plunged by more than 66% in just a few weeks, while overall spirits sales in Canada dipped by nearly 13%. Bars and restaurants, accustomed to stocking familiar American brands, struggled to meet customer demand, and some reported delayed shipments and empty shelves. Retailers scrambled to adjust inventory, often turning to Canadian-made spirits or lesser-known imports to fill the gaps. Domestic producers saw a temporary boost, with sales rising roughly 14% in some provinces, but these substitutes often failed to satisfy regular consumers who were vocal about missing their favorite American whiskeys. The financial strain extended beyond store shelves. Distributors faced pressure to redirect supplies, logistics costs rose, and some businesses began warning about potential layoffs if the situation persisted. Headlines across the country reflected growing frustration, with Canadian liquor market implodes dominating newspapers and social feeds alike. What was intended as a symbolic strike against U.S. tariffs was quickly transforming into a full-blown economic headache. Now you may want to know how Canadian consumers themselves reacted to the sudden disappearance of Jack Daniel's and other U.S. spirits. So, let's have a look. As American whiskeys and spirits vanished, Canadian distilleries saw both a challenge and an opportunity. Companies like Forty Creek, Alberta Premium, and Canadian Club tried to step into the gap, ramping up production and marketing to attract customers who had lost access to familiar U.S. brands. Sales of domestic spirits rose by roughly 14% in provinces like Ontario, and smaller distilleries reported a temporary surge in demand. Yet, while local options were available, they couldn't fully satisfy loyal drinkers. Many Canadians missed the taste and familiarity of brands like Jack Daniel's, leaving bars and liquor stores in a tricky position. Orders were delayed, and inventory rotations became unpredictable as distributors struggled to meet demand. The sudden reliance on domestic alternatives also exposed limitations in Canada's supply chain. Smaller distilleries weren't equipped to scale quickly, and some provinces had to ration products to avoid stockouts. Social media buzzed with posts comparing the new options to the beloved American whiskeys, often unfavorably, highlighting that a temporary replacement wasn't enough for many consumers. This shift in purchasing behavior and consumer dissatisfaction naturally led to the public backlash and growing frustration among Canadians. As empty shelves became the new normal, frustration among Canadians quickly boiled over. People didn't just miss their favorite drinks, they felt caught in the middle of a political game. Social media exploded with photos of barren liquor store aisles, bar owners venting about canceled orders, and consumers complaining that they were paying the price for a dispute they had nothing to do with. Hashtags like #BringBack Jack started trending, capturing the collective disappointment across the country. Bars scrambled to offer alternatives, but patrons often left disappointed, unwilling to settle for local brands they didn't know or enjoy. Restaurants reported canceled reservations or complaints as regular customers found themselves without the familiar American whiskeys they loved. Even some loyal supporters of the boycott started questioning the strategy, wondering if the government had miscalculated the real-life impact. This growing frustration wasn't just about empty bottles, it was about trust. People began to question whether political gestures were worth their inconvenience, and the sense of normalcy that Canadians had long taken for granted was slipping away. Now, let's have a look at how the political fallout played out, and the divisions it created within Canada itself. The boycott's ripple effects weren't just economic, they shook Canada's political landscape. Prime Minister Mark Carney had framed the move as a decisive stand against U.S. tariffs, but the reality quickly became messier. Provinces were split. Ontario and Quebec largely stuck with the ban, while Alberta and Saskatchewan quietly resumed limited sales of U.S. spirits to avoid further disruption. This division highlighted that 40 million Canadians were not experiencing a unified policy, and businesses across provinces were facing different rules. Political criticism came fast. Polls conducted in April 2025 showed that nearly 58% of Canadians disapproved of the blanket alcohol boycott, citing empty shelves, delayed orders, and personal inconvenience. Even within government circles, officials worried that the symbolic strike was overshadowing its intended message, especially as Jack Daniel's and other U.S. brands accounted for less than 1% of Brown-Forman's global sales, meaning the impact on U.S. producers was minimal, while Canadians bore the real cost. With stores reporting 60 to 80% drops in U.S. spirit sales in major markets and bars struggling to find substitutes, public frustration intensified. What was meant to project strength instead exposed weaknesses, both politically and economically. Canada's bold boycott quickly caught the attention of the global community, and not in a flattering way. From Ottawa to Tokyo, observers were watching closely as 66% of U.S. spirit sales in Canada vanished almost overnight. While Canada intended to signal strength against U.S. tariffs, international markets saw it as a cautionary tale in trade miscalculation. American producers were largely unfazed. Jack Daniel's parent company, Brown-Forman, reported that Canadian sales accounted for only 1% of its total revenue. meaning the boycott barely dented its bottom line. Meanwhile, other global markets, including Europe and Asia, quietly absorbed the redirected stock, ensuring supply chains and sales outside North America remained stable. For Canada, the optics were harsher. Empty shelves and disrupted supply chains highlighted how dependent the country remained on U.S. imports. International business analysts pointed out that this visible disruption could weaken Canada's credibility in future trade negotiations, signaling to partners that symbolic gestures can carry real economic costs. The backlash abroad mirrored domestic frustration, underscoring that trade disputes can reverberate far beyond borders. This international scrutiny naturally leads to the next focus of our video, which is how Brown-Forman and other U.S. producers reacted to the Canadian boycott. As the Canadian boycott took hold, Brown-Forman, the maker of Jack Daniels, moved quickly to address the disruption. CEO Lawson Whiting called Canada's action worse than a tariff, noting that the move didn't just impose a tax, it removed products entirely from the market. Even though Canadian sales represented only about 1% of Brown-Forman's global revenue, the public backlash and media attention made the situation feel much bigger. To mitigate losses, the company began redirecting shipments to other international markets, ensuring that European, Asian, and U.S. customers remained fully stocked. Analysts reported that while Canadian revenue fell by an estimated 60 to 70% in the first 2 months of the boycott, global sales for Brown-Forman remained steady. The company also accelerated the rollout of new products, including limited editions like Jack Daniel's Tennessee Blackberry, aimed at markets less affected by the boycott. Meanwhile, Brown-Forman publicly emphasized that the Canadian decision was disproportionate, framing it as more symbolic than financially meaningful. The company's measured response highlighted a key contrast. While Canada struggled with empty shelves and frustrated consumers, U.S. producers could adapt and continue normal operations. Even as Canadian shelves emptied, the broader trade conflict showed no signs of cooling. The U.S. 25% tariffs on Canadian goods remained firmly in place, and both countries continued to navigate the ripple effects. American producers adapted quickly, while Canadian sales of U.S. spirits dropped by roughly 66%. Overall revenue for companies like Brown-Forman remained steady, showing that the boycott had limited impact beyond national borders. For Canada, the situation highlighted vulnerabilities in the domestic market. Bars and liquor stores struggled to replace American brands, while distributors faced rising logistics costs and uneven inventory. Consumer dissatisfaction surged, with polls in April 2025 showing nearly 60% of Canadians felt the boycott had negatively affected their daily lives. Economists and trade analysts warned that without a diplomatic resolution, continued retaliation could escalate further, risking more than just alcohol sales. The ongoing trade tension set the stage for lessons about the real costs of political gestures. The Jack Daniel's boycott offers a clear lesson. Political gestures, even well-intentioned, can come with unexpected consequences. Canada's attempt to send a message to Washington disrupted bars, liquor stores, and consumers, with U.S. spirits sales in the country dropping by more than 66% in just weeks, while empty shelves and frustrated patrons became the new normal. Even loyal supporters began questioning whether symbolic strikes were worth the real-life inconvenience. For businesses, the ripple effects were tangible. Distributors scrambled to reroute supplies, domestic distilleries tried to meet sudden demand, and some retailers warned of potential layoffs if the disruption continued. On the international stage, Canada's credibility was challenged, while American producers, like Brown-Forman, adapted quickly, redirecting shipments and launching limited edition products. This episode underscores the importance of weighing economic impacts against political messaging. Trade disputes are more than abstract policies. They affect real people, real businesses, and daily life. So here's the question for you. Do you think Canada's boycott was a bold stand worth the chaos, or a misstep that hurt everyday citizens? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth analyses of global trade and economic conflicts. Thanks for watching, everybody, and see you soon in another video.